Okay, so good morning, everybody. Thanks to the organizers for inviting me to this fall school. My background is in computer science and computational linguistics, and I've been doing a lot of work at the intersection of natural language processing and knowledge representation. So my PhD in 2005 was, for example, on something that I called in those days ontology learning from text. So I was concerned with how can we derive ontological knowledge by reading large amounts of text. Yeah. And today I've prepared, I'm not only going to talk about my own work, but I've tried to prepare a kind of overview of the work that has been done over the last decades, even on formalizing and extracting common sense knowledge. And I believe we are at an interesting point in time where we are seeing that these things are getting quite serious. Okay, so we have seen a lot of toy work in AI on small domains and people trying to axiomatize knowledge. And now in the last decade, we're seeing a lot of resources emerging where we have large amounts of common sense knowledge, and we can discuss whether this is fit for purpose, are we there yet? But the good thing is that we have things now to play around at a larger scale. This relates a bit to the talks as well from Axel and also from Antonio. They have been talking about knowledge representation, also knowledge graphs in general, but also things like description logics. I'm not going today into the logics itself. I'm looking more at the, let's say, epistemological question, like what is the kind of common sense knowledge that we would like to represent. Okay, so that's just the preview. So let's go into the introduction. Now, what is common sense knowledge? Very difficult to grasp. Okay, I can say you have not seen any definition that at the end I would say, well, I buy this. Okay, but I like therefore the more longer explanation that Davis gives. So Davis published a few years ago a kind of overview on efforts in AI to formalize common sense knowledge, and I like what he proposes here as a kind of attempt to get something that is a bit more operational in terms of definition, right? Operational, I mean, we can use that to think about, do we regard this, would we count this as common sense knowledge, or would we regard this as more specialized knowledge in a particular domain? And he says something like, by common sense knowledge, we mean roughly what a typical 7-year-old knows about the world. Okay, so that's very arbitrary, obviously, okay? But I think that's at least something that one can start and think about, what knowledge do we have about what a typical 7-year-old knows, and how far are we in approximating this? And he says something like including fundamental categories like time and space, specific domains such as physical objects and substances, plants, animals, and natural entities, humans, their psychology, and their interactions, and society at large. That's quite a lot already, okay? So even he says, I'm restricting this to what 7-year-olds know, but then if you look at what comes after, so including the including part, you see that's really a lot, okay? But nevertheless, okay? I mean, we need to have some kind of reference line, and then there are a few disclaimers. So he says something like, obviously there's a bit of relativism involved here, okay? So we cannot assume that everyone in the world has the same common sense knowledge. It's culturally dependent, it's related to how we are brought up and so forth. There's a lot of social diversity, disclaimer. And then he says something important, that he says he would exclude book learning and kind of material explicitly taught at school. So let's say he would not assume that detailed knowledge about mathematics, like you're taught, like algebra, for example, he would say, according to that definition, that's not part of common sense knowledge, okay? Or any specific knowledge about, let's say, a certain game or conventions and so forth. Okay, that's okay. It's clear that it's a bit arbitrary, right? But I think it gives us some kind of reference line of what we are talking about. And it's in any case, it's very hard to define what is common sense knowledge. So which systems need common sense knowledge? Also difficult question. That's my own sort of claim. So any computer system that needs to perform in an open world, in particular in interaction with human agents. So open world means, to me, when we talk about systems that are not just trained to perform on a very narrow task, okay, but we have systems that are more open-ended, that might have to handle tasks that they never have heard about, okay, or never have encountered, then this is where, in particular, we need to equip systems with common sense knowledge that allows them to be equipped to handle basically the unknown. And this happens in particular in interaction with humans, because humans, of course, we live in a conceptually rich world. We conceptualize a lot of things in our minds. And of course, we need systems that support us to keep up with that, okay? With the rich conceptualization about the world that we have and those things that matter to us in our daily life. So I'm still here in the phase of stealing content from others. So I like this story that Davis also mentioned in that article, so I'm going to read it. So he says, on a mundane morning in late summer in Paris, the impossible happened. The Mona Lisa vanished. On Sunday evening, August 20, 1911, Leonardo da Vinci's best-known painting was hanging in her usual place on the wall of the Salon Carré between Correggio's mystical marriage and Tizian's allegory of Alfonso d'Avalos. On Tuesday morning, when the Louvre reopened to the public, she was gone. Within hours of the discovery of the empty frame, stashed behind a radiator, the story broke in an extra edition of Le Temps, the leading morning newspaper. Incredulous reporters from local papers and international news services converged on the museum. Georges Benedit, the acting director, and his curators were speculating freely to the press. Currently, that's an area where I'm involved in natural language processing. We are not yet that far that a system could really understand the complexity of this kind of story and make the right inferences, because it involves a lot of common sense knowledge that typically, in the general case, machines don't have. Okay, so if I ask you a few questions, we will try to bring up what is this kind of common sense that we as humans use in interpreting such a story. So if I ask you, did the Mona Lisa really vanish? It's said in the second sentence. Okay, then did the Mona Lisa vanish here? All right. I mean, did it vanish in the literal sense of simply disappearing in ether? Yeah. No. Okay. Right. So actually, what happened here to the Mona Lisa? What happened? It got stolen. Right.
Behind a radiator. No, the frame was stashed.
The frame was stashed. So it was stolen. Exactly. Right. It's not told in the. It's not never said in the story. Okay, but we have a lot of knowledge that, okay, we see it was stashed behind a radiator, the frames, it was empty, so that someone must have done something to the frame, manipulated it, taking out the actual canvas or whatever, and so forth, right? So why was the frame stashed? Why? Well, I've already more or less... So, yeah, exactly. So someone had to stash the frame to get the canvas out and put it into the jacket or something, right? Now, where was the Mona Lisa on Monday before the event described in the news story? Well, that's maybe a bit of obvious, but it says on the story, right? So obviously we know that this story is describing an event of a robbery, and all of us know that before the event, the Mona Lisa was in its normal place. Then something happened, the robbery happened, and then afterwards it was somewhere else. It was in the hands of the robber or of the robbing team. Okay, so we do have all these inferences because we have enough common sense knowledge, and we can also simulate this whole story in our heads using this knowledge about the world that we have. So there has been a lot of work in AI in trying to try to formalize these things, and I would say what we see here are classical categories or domains of common sense knowledge. Okay, so there has been a lot of work on mereology. So I'm just putting here some, some pointers of people that prominently have worked on these things, but that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of more work, obviously, okay? But people have tried to formalize what does it mean that something is a part of something else? How do we axiomatize parthood? People have been working on, in the context of early semantic networks, on how to define that something is a special kind of something else. So that's what we call taxonomical knowledge. Large body of AI has looked into time and action, how to formalize time, using different formalisms, event calculus, situation calculus, interval calculus. Very similar the work on axiomatizing space, that to some extent is similar to the work on formalizing time, because we're looking at topological relations between sets of things, either sets of time points, for example, like in interval calculus, or basically sets of points in the 2D or 3D space. So there are some commonalities between work on formalizing time and space. And people have put some work into trying to formulate basic intuitive physical understanding of the world. Okay, so what happens when things move, when things fall? People have tried to come up with an ontology of fluids. And there's been even work on capturing and axiomatizing what has been called folk psychology, which is about how do we capture, the beliefs that people have, what did they think in the past, in the future, how does it change what they believe, and how do we formalize that someone knows that someone else knows something, and so forth. Okay, and plans and goals. That I haven't put any references because that's quite extensive, and it also relates back to these things as well, because these formalisms here, event calculus, situation calculus, have also been used in planning, also other kind of temporal logic. So there has been a lot of work on trying to axiomatize basically, provide logical theories that axiomatize these important domains. By the way, a question to you: Do you find that? Do you think that there are things missing here? If you relate back to my definition of what a 7-year-old knows, I mean, one could argue if this is something that a 7-year-old knows. Okay, so obviously a 7-year-old has knowledge in some way or the other about these things, but are things that intuitively would be missing to you? That's just a question that I'm curious about to hear, if you have any intuitions.
For example, what is art in that specific example with Mona Lisa? That the child can draw something and know this is something that you can put on the refrigerator, but it's not mentioned in here. Mm-hmm. Interpretation of these kinds of things.
So kind of interpretation of meaning of human activities, like for example, what does it mean to a human to draw something or be artistic? Okay, yeah, interesting.
Social interaction.
Social interaction, yes. What would you mean with that, more precisely?
Things that a 7-year-old child has some form of common sense regarding how to interact with people, what certain actions would cause kind of on a social level.
Uh-huh.
So for instance, I remember this experiment where like I don't know, like 4-year-old child was sitting there and seeing how like a grown-up person had troubles kind of accessing the interior of the shells, and
yes,
anticipated that, and I think this is well, maybe as an indicator that this is also kind of like a social concept.
Yes, I agree that this is very important, and this would be related to the intentions that people have when they pursue certain actions, and it's known from cognitive psychology. I think Tomasello, for example, is someone that has looked into that in the context of language learning. Also, Gergely and Zebra have stressed the importance of infants understanding intentions of others when pursuing certain actions in terms of fostering their own learning. Yes, I agree that it's not. One might think that it has been covered here, but I think that the type of work that has been done here goes in another direction, more in terms of trying to formalize sort of what beliefs people have, sort of. But as far as I know, there's been no attempt to really capture a deeper level the intentions that people have when they do certain events, for example. So that's a good point. Do you have a comment as well?
Along with intentions, intuition might also be missing from here.
Intuition. Yeah, okay. That's a difficult one.
It's hard to model, but
Yeah, it's intuition. I'm not sure I would say that this is... for me, this would not belong to common sense, but it's a more human ability to I don't know. I'm getting into difficult terrain. I would not see intuition as part of common sense, but as a kind of meta ability to be creative and have sort of ways to solve things without maybe a deeper, very deep reasoning, but more in an explorative way. I don't know. Let me not get into that terrain further. I would say that's not part of common sense, but thanks. Okay, yes?
So I would put in maybe mechanical systems all the way from trucks, because 7-year-olds can be fascinated by trucks, to technology. And so an interesting question is whether common sense evolves over time, and what was common sense 50
Yeah, that's a
years
good point,
ago
yeah.
is different now,
Yeah.
because 7-year-olds are exposed to a lot of different things than they were before.
Yeah, okay. There was when Pat Hayes had this physical knife physics manifesto. I think he was trying to also formalize part of mechanics and forces and so forth. Of course, he didn't get into trucks, but because he was trying to come up with a more general theory. But that could be part of some kind of physical or mechanical knowledge about how things in the world work, right, in the physical world. There was some other comment? Yeah.
I was going to say cultural and social norms.
Yeah.
Because common sense is not context independent.
Yeah.
But I think it's highly dependent on the culture and context that the 7-year-old grew up in.
I would completely agree with that. Yes, I think that's a very important part, and it relates to the social aspect that you were mentioning. I mean, nowadays we know that children are very good at interpreting social cues and also understanding, for example, when they are in a teaching situation. So they are experts at understanding cues when someone is trying to explain them something, and it helps them even to focus their attention on certain things. Now, is that common sense, or is that more kind of, I don't know, social behavior in general? I don't know, but I think we're in a space where we have to debate what is common sense and what is more kind of more social, just social disposition. Yeah. Yes, sorry, you.
So I think about what can an object be used for, dispositions, capabilities.
Yeah, like affordances, right? That has been called affordances sometimes in psychology. Yes. Okay, I feel we could go on for the whole talk. Actually, I'm not particularly keen on running here through my complete program, because it's really interesting to discuss with you. Yes, I do think that there are a lot of things missing, and maybe some of the things that you've discussed will appear later in the talk. But I mean, it's clear to me that just saying we have some logical theories that axiomatize these things, that's not going to be bringing us eventually very close to what a 7-year-old knows. Okay, so there are a number of aspects that, in my view, are missing here as well. Okay, so big question in AI: how do we scale up? Okay, so how do we go to a point where we have really common sense knowledge at a large scale? And I can say, if we don't have this as a large scale, it's going to be quite useless. Okay, that has been shown a lot in the history of AI. So modeling just one small domain, that's not going to have impact. So we need really common sense knowledge at a large scale, because also 7-year-olds, yeah, if we go by that definition, have knowledge on really a very broad scale. So I'm talking about scaling up acquisition of common sense knowledge. Let me look a bit at the time. So what approaches have we seen and are we seeing right now out there. So I would sketch 3 types of things, and this selection of pointers is again quite biased. Yeah. So on the one hand, we have attempts to model common sense knowledge basic as a kind of knowledge engineering activity. Okay, and one of the biggest projects in that area has been the Psych project, and briefly that is often cited as one of the big projects in AI in terms of formalizing common sense knowledge. I will say a bit about that because one could have many lectures on Psych itself. I'm talking about web mining or learning by reading text. That has been quite some success in the last 10 to 20 years. And many attempts nowadays use some type of crowdsourcing or games with a purpose, however you call that, okay, this kind of flavor where you ask humans and try to elicit some knowledge from humans. You have mentioned that, Antonio, that of course common sense knowledge is often very implicit, okay? So it's not that we find this always in text. So for example, if you think like knowledge about how mechanics, okay, or knowledge about physics, that's not something that we often find in text, or things about how events causally relate to each other. That's not always easy to get that out just by web mining. And then I'm going to give you some examples of projects that have been trying to crowdsource that, okay? So let's look at Psych as just one example in the space, a very prominent one. So Psych has been a long-term AI project aiming at capturing deeper common sense knowledge within a comprehensive ontology and knowledge base. Started, what is that now, 4 centuries ago, yeah, more or less, yeah. Sorry, 4 decades, not 4 centuries, 4 decades.
Feels like
Yeah. That was a Freudian mistake. 4 decades by Doug Leonard and many others, not the only one. And I would say, for me, I mean, some people nowadays have called this as the biggest failure or biggest catastrophe of AI. So I'm quoting here Pedro Domingos, for example, author of The Master Algorithm. Interesting book. I would not agree with that, okay? I would not agree with this being a catastrophic failure. We might come to that at the end. Obviously, this has been a large project with a lot of manual effort going on. Later on, they turned as well into trying to mine some things. But really a huge effort, but I think the principles that they applied in modeling knowledge, I think we can still learn from that, okay? So if we judge the project from the maybe expected end result that people were expecting, because obviously when Doug Leonard and colleagues went into this endeavor, they were quite optimistic, like in many fields of AI, that progress would be there, right? Like after 10 years, they would manage to gather a large amount of common sense knowledge. But in spite of this, if we judge this, if we not only judge the end result, but if we judge also the path and see what the principles that have been worked out by these people, then I think to me this is a success, okay? Because we've learned a lot about how large-scale engineering can work. So they had things like dividing things into an epistemological level where we have purely declarative representation, first-order logic with high-order flavors, non-monotonic and default reasoning, reflection and reification. So very declarative level, plus a heuristic level that relied on a number of special purpose representations and procedures for speedy inference. Okay? So they realized that if you have a very large knowledge base that is declarative, if you want to be efficient in reasoning, you have to have a modular approach where you have micro theories about time or space that might even be within themselves or across them inconsistent, even, okay, in the sense of some things would have to be retracted, but it gives you the ability to be to specialize your reasoning and be very efficient in that particular domain, okay? So we've learned that, that trying to be very clear, ontologically sound, while having speedy inference are not a contradiction. One can have systems, large-scale knowledge engineering systems that combine the best of 2 worlds, okay? And well, they were quite slow at the beginning. So after 10 years, they had something like 100,000 concepts. You could say predicates, okay? So when I say terms, I mean predicates. And by 2017, I mean, I think they're still active, right? There's a company that is developing Psych further. It's called PsyCorp. And in 2017, they reached 1.5 million concepts. And by now, there's even an open version of Psych that is released for the public and for research. Is a bit smaller than the proprietary version, but it's out there also for the scientific community to use. Okay, let's look at the second part, approaches to extract knowledge automatically. Okay, and this is an area where I've been working as well on since 2006. And but these are just a few systems in the space that I think are quite milestones in the history of acquiring common sense knowledge from the web or from reading texts. So this is a system that I developed in 2004, so that's 2 decades now ago, where I was interested in, so I was looking at text and sort of so-called named entities, like for example here in the text you might find the entity South Africa, right? And then for a system it would be useful to understand, well, what is this thing, okay? What is this thing South Africa, okay? So I was trying to come up with a system that can automatically find taxonomic or typing information, and I was exploiting the web, okay? So I was issuing large amount of queries to the web and then see where do I see sort of a high number of hits, okay? So for example, imagine you have here a tourism domain and you have an ontology that talks about, well, countries, hotels, and other kind of entities. And then you can generate queries to the web and see, well, in such patterns like South Africa is a country, South Africa is a hotel, and so forth. And then you get hits back, and then this could be seen as a kind of maximum likelihood kind of reasoning, okay? So the one that has the highest frequency, that's the one I take as being sort of the right answer, so then I can classify South Africa as being a country, okay? And this worked incredibly well. So for example, here, these are top results. So the system could find that Atlantic is a city, Bahamas is an island, USA is a country, Connecticut is a state, Caribbean is a sea, Mediterranean is a sea, South Africa, okay, is a town, that was a mistake. Canada is a country, Guatemala is a city, Africa is a region, Australia is a country, and so forth. Okay, so it's really not bad. So you see that by leveraging the massive amount of data that humans have externalized on the web, you can do quite interesting things. Okay, and you will see that the further systems that I will discuss are just variations of that. Okay, many of those systems that we see out there are variations of that paradigm of leveraging, we could say, the wisdom of the crowds. Okay. So people externalizing a lot of stuff out there on the web. So a few years later, I was trying to generalize this and see, well, can we get beyond these kind of more taxonomic relations or kind of relations, or instantiation relations, let's say. And so if we go back to the work of, or to the thinking of Aristotle, so he thought that one can describe the nature of things in terms of what he called a number of causes, okay? So I'm not a philosopher, so this might be an imperfect approximation of what Aristotle actually meant, but he talked about 4 causes. So material cause is something where we think about, well, what is the actual material essence that an object is made of, or that something is made of. Okay, so the so-called agentive cause, what is the thing that brought this thing into existence, okay, or that causes this thing to move or to change? What is the formal cause, or what are the properties, what is the form or type that this thing has? And what's the final cause is, well, what is this thing made for? What's the purpose, what's the intention that a certain object or thing has, okay? And, I mean, these 4 causes look very simple, yeah, but you'll see that much of the knowledge that we're now looking at deriving from the web, I mean, in some sense or the other, fits these categories. Okay, so these 4 causes were picked up by Postojovsky, a computational linguist that in his theory of the generative lexicon. I'm not going into the generative lexicon. It's essentially a theory how we describe the meaning of the lexical meaning of words. And he referred to those roles defined by Aristotle and tried to apply them to the meaning of words. And then he defined exactly those 4 roles that we would have in a dictionary entry, let's say, describing the meaning of a word. For a word, we could describe, well, the thing that the word denotes, what is this thing made of? Okay, what material, what are the components, what brought the thing that the word denotes into existence, what are formal properties of the thing denoted by the word, and what is the purpose or function of the thing that the word denotes in the real world. And I was trying to see, can we apply this paradigm of leveraging the wisdom of the crowd to extract also this kind of knowledge from the web, okay? So it was a kind of simple methodology, so following the same idea of the learning by Googling paradigm that I showed you before. So we have a word that we want to learn these 4 relations about. We generate search engine queries, we download search engine snippets, we tag them, and we do some kind of simple regex matching, so nothing really fancy or complex. And then we have some mechanisms for scoring and weighting. I mean, I could talk a lot about those. I'm abstracting here a lot to bring across some of the ideas. And to my surprise, when I did this work, what one got back was not bad at all. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through some of them, because even after some years that I've not looked into this in particular, I found it interesting to see what can be automatically derived. So you see, if you look at the knife, that's a very concrete object, right? The system comes up with something like, okay, this is formally steel, this is a weapon, this is an item, this is kitchenware, this is an object, this is an instrument, an utensil, equipment, tool, is a cutting instrument. You see some problems related to stemming, so I didn't fake the results here a posteriori, and so forth. Okay, but it's not bad at all. So what is it made of? Well, it has a blade, it's made of metal, it's made of steel, it has also wood as part. Okay, person, it has a handle, and so forth. Okay, it's produced, made, or created, so yes, it's an artifact. And what is it used for? Well, can be used, okay? It shows up as the first hit, but that's what it is. Can be used to kill someone, can be used to slit, cut, slice, split. I'm skipping the not so good ones. Prune, cut things. Okay, remove moisture, that's an interesting one, right? I would like to see that happening, using a knife to remove moisture. Cut a flap, split a cake, so the more we go down, we see more specific things, but they are not bad, okay? So we see very interesting specific things, for example, here, also down here, okay? And we could go on. So a book is, made of signs, letters, pages, language, whatever. It's written, you can give a book to someone, you can select it, read it, purchase, identify it, it can inspire, it can be used to inspire, present information. Quite interesting what we can get just automatically with a quite unsupervised method. There's no purpose of beer, I have to disappoint you. So the system didn't found any good use at that point for beer. And we can even look at very abstract things, okay, like conversation. So I showed you a number of tangible kind of things, knife. Book is between a tangible and a more conceptual object, right? Because book can be used to denote the actual material thing, but also the content. Conversation, an abstract word where I might have guessed the system might have problems. It's not too bad, okay? So conversation is an expression, provides a context, has a function, is also a kind of skill. Yeah, it's a skill to maintain good conversations. It's about interaction, communication, activity. It's not too bad, okay? And it has something, it involves relationships, can involve silence, sometimes answering questions, sentences, story, laughter. So it's not bad at all, okay? Okay, now, anyway, we did an evaluation of that, which showed that it was not really bad. So we had people scoring. What the algorithm came up with points from 0 to 3. And we see that really the majority of items were rated more in the 3, which shows that if you ask someone to evaluate that, they are tend to give high credits to what the system comes. Of course, this is always an a posteriori evaluation. This is always biased, okay? Because if you present people these things, like, okay, is conversation a skill? okay, then they might be kind of lenient with that. But it shows that what comes out is meaningful, okay? So, this is a very, I would say basic principle, okay? Basic principle is you want to learn something, you go out on the web, you use a search engine, or you read large amounts of text to extract these things, and we've seen it works. And there are many people that have been working on similar ideas. So one very well-known system is Know It All from Washington University that was developed at the same time when I was doing these things, and they really came up with a very well-engineered system, right? A kind of bootstrapping approach to find relevant websites, kind of a system to match these kind of regexps, and then more sophisticated techniques using kind of Bayesian networks to assess whether a piece of knowledge that we found is reliable. So they have really sophisticated this simple idea in many respects and come up with systems that can acquire really large amounts of knowledge by reading the web. So very important pointer in this space, the Know It All system. And the Never-Ending Learning System by Tom Mitchell from CMU is in principle built on very similar ideas, okay? What I like about this project is that they really set out to let a system learn forever. That was their goal, okay? At the end, they stopped at some point, I think 2017, yeah, or something. But they did this experiment, okay? So can we put out a system out there that starts with an initial ontology, defining some hundreds of categories, so sport, athletes, binary relations. Can we give them a bunch of kind of samples for each relation or each concept? And then we let the system off, reading websites on the web and trying to learn more patterns and more examples of the same concept. And the interesting thing is that they involve humans in this effort. So there was a website where you as a human could go, you could inspect the results of a particular iteration of NEL. So this was an iterative system that did many iterations, improving itself over iterations. And then you could go there and give feedback and say, well, this is correct, this is wrong, and then this would be used to approximate the concepts and relations better in the next iteration. Okay? And they really had the goal of running this like 24 hours every day, forever. Okay, as a scientific experiment, I think very, very interesting. And what kind of knowledge is produced here? Well, this is a fragment where you see what kind of thing they would learn. Okay, so they would learn things like, okay, Toyota is in the automobile sector. Toyota created Prius and Corolla. Red Wings have hometown in Detroit. So there's a quite bias to geographical knowledge, also kind of more economic sector knowledge, sports knowledge, and so forth. What they showed is that they had a decreasing amount of feedback to the system over time. So here you see how many predictions of the system were labeled as false by humans in the system, and this was really decreasing over time, the amount of feedback needed. At the same time, the accuracy of the system in the facts was increasing over the number of iterations, reaching something like mean average precision for the 1,000 most confident predictions of the system to be more or less, let's say, between 55 and 60%. Okay, so obviously not perfect, but I think that was the demonstration that we can have systems that can, for a very long time, be deployed and acquire all sorts of knowledge. One must say, I think that this is quite limited as well in what the system can learn. Okay, so if you think about the things that I introduced at the beginning, so would this help you in understanding the story about the Mona Lisa? Very limited. Okay, so we have a lot of kind of typing information, simple relations. So I think the challenge is still out there. Could these systems like this, like NEL, really over time acquire much more complex knowledge than these simple triples? How much time do I have?
We're in time. We have 20 minutes or 90 minutes left, but with discussion, maybe
Okay. So then I just mentioned our recent work where we were looking at can we extract common sense knowledge by what we call triple ranking. So that's more recent work with my student Sofia and Jebara. We were looking at can we extract some kind of prototypical knowledge. Okay, so we try to look at also deriving knowledge that can be used in manipulation relevant tasks. And for example, two things that might be important, let's say to a robot, for example, performing in a kitchen scenario, I mean, we have this a lot here right now, is, well, what are the typical locations of an object, or what are the typical uses of an object, okay? So if I want to support humans in daily tasks as a machine, I would need to understand these kind of things, many more. So we have recently tried to formalize this as a ranking problem. So basically you could give a common sense reasoning system a query such as dishwasher located X, okay, and then what we want is we want to get all possible bindings of X ranked by prototypicality, okay? Of course this is always default knowledge, okay? Because in a particular knowledge, always things can be overridden, okay? But we wanted to get sort of this kind of default knowledge. So what we did is we used state-of-the-art techniques based on embeddings. I'm not going to that because either you've heard that already, or it would require a separate separate kind of course, okay? But so imagine you give a system a query such as dishwasher located at X, and then you retrieve candidate triples. We do this from DBpedia, okay? So there are knowledge resources where you can get candidates of rooms, for example, in an apartment. So then you have candidates, and then what we do is we embed the dishwasher and kitchen, laundry room, and so forth using different types of embeddings. Doesn't matter for today, so skipgrams or Nassari vectors. And we have an unsupervised version where we just compute basically a kind of prototypicality by similarity in vector space using the cosine similarity, or we have a supervised version where we fit a function that is specific to the particular relation that we want to learn, okay? And then the result is something like this, okay? We could say, okay, the top default location for a dishwasher is in the kitchen, could be also in the laundry room, could be also in the pantry. I don't know what that is actually. Could be also in the wine cellar. Okay, some people might have their dishwasher in the wine cellar, okay? Well, it's not ruled out. And so what we saw, here you see some results. So NDCG is just a measure for ranking retrieval results. So we have a ranking task, so we can compare the results of our system to the ranking that human users do of these locations. And we have precision at 1, which is, well, is the top result correct? Or precision at 3, are the 3 top results correct, basically, okay? Or one of the top 3 results. How is the correctness of the top 3 results? So we see that here we have very simple baselines, so we can look at how frequent are locations in general. So that's kind of independent of the particular object. We can look at, if you look at DBpedia, so what are the kind of rooms that have the most incoming links? So you have very simple baselines that show, well, your precision is not really good, but not, I would not say not catastrophic. And then we have our systems. Now these are the unsupervised systems. This is a linear combination of the two unsupervised systems based on different embeddings. And here we have the supervised version. And then we see that the supervised version is not really in all cases best. Okay, so basically ranking by something like similarity, having an unsupervised approach, ranking just by similarity in word embedding space is not doing bad at all. So we have the highest correlation with the human ranking. We have a quite reasonable, the best precision at 3, although when we train the supervised system, we have the best prediction regarding the highest precision regarding the first prediction, the top ranked result. But it's quite interesting that, again, with a very unsupervised technique without tuning to a specific relation, you can go quite far. Disclaimer, why did that work so good? Because in this example, we had a pre-selection of potential rooms and locations that was derived from a curated knowledge resource like DBpedia. Okay? So we only extracted things that are known to be rooms or potential locations within an apartment or a house. And then this unsupervised thing works well. If you wouldn't do that, you would get all sort of weird things as well, okay? But this shows that these hybrid systems where you combine knowledge that already exists in a resource with maybe some unsupervised or supervised additional steps can give you basically a good result. Okay. Now I have to plan the rest of my journey. Okay, I'm not going into that. There's a system also called WebChild that has gone one step further, and by now we are reaching systems that try to be much more fine-grained in terms of the knowledge they extract. Okay, so if you think about my work that I presented you with the qualer relations, very rough, 4 relations, 1 constitutive, 1 agentive, one formal role, and so forth. So now we see systems that are really trying to be much more fine-grained in terms of extracting formal properties of objects, shape, size, taste, emotions evoked. We see the same system, WebChild, trying to extract comparative knowledge. So something like a car is typically faster than a bike. And they're looking into more fine-grained part of relations. Okay, obviously, what we know from ontology engineering, that there's not just one part of relation. Right? We have things like physical parts. Sometimes we have things that are member of a certain group, or we have things that something is made of. Okay, so these are ontologically speaking very different relations, and we're now seeing systems that are really trying to be much more specific in the knowledge that they extract compared to the early systems like 10 years ago. Okay. As I don't have too much time, I'll leave you with some pointers. So there are a number of crowdsourcing approaches where we try to elicit people in the game. And the difficult thing is, how do you construct a good interface that allows people to put that knowledge into the system? Okay? So there's a lot of tweaking around how do we design the interface to capture knowledge from humans. There's one resource that you might have seen that is ConceptNet. So actually, to give you a flavor, unfortunately, I didn't find so unfortunately, ConceptNet does not know the concept of a fall school. It does neither know the concept of a summer school, by the way. So, but you see the kind of knowledge that ConceptNet has. So if I look for something like school, I can see things that are typically located at the school, related terms, types of school, then synonyms in different languages. What else? Well, what is a school capable of? Okay, lower the requirements. That'd be a major pain. That's quite interesting. And ConceptNet has been derived from many different resources, but the core of the project was really a project where they really had people providing this knowledge. Okay, so that was the core of the project, and it's a very interesting resource. It's very noisy as well, but it's used a lot in different in different projects, also in natural language processing, but also in other areas. A particularly interesting, that here we come to the event knowledge that you have been mentioning at the beginning. We see now crowdsourced resources coming into existence that try to elicit more detailed event knowledge that relates to causation. Okay, that's very interesting. So, for example, I'm going to just cite Atomic. So Atomic has kind of dimensions where they try to come up with rules about events, and they have 3 types of rules. So one says, well, if an event happens, then what does it with a person, for example? If an event happens, what kind of follow events does it trigger, or previous events does it require? Or what does it do with mental states of people that are affected by the event? Okay, so these are 3 categories, and then we have sort of the pre-phase of an event. Okay? So something that causes the event to happen. So we can make predictions about what causes the event to happen, or what properties does the agent that causes the event have. Okay, and we also can formalize the effects. So rules that talk about effects, both on the agent itself that performs the action, but also on the, linguistically it's called the theme, so on the patient or on the receiver of the action or event, okay? So you see things like, we can talk about the intent, so why does X cause the event, or we can talk about the need, so what is the need of X that causes him or her to do that event. Or afterwards, we can look at, well, what effects does the event have on X, or on the person that carries it out? What would X likely want to do after the event, and how does X feel after the event? So all very interesting social aspects about what does the event do with the people doing the event or receiving it. And they have managed to extract 877,000 of these kind of rules by crowdsourcing. Okay, another one is glucose. I don't have time to do that, sorry. So do I have 2 minutes? 2 minutes. I'll end just with saying that there's a lot of knowledge out there, interesting resources. I think it's very important to test the impact of common sense knowledge. Okay, and I'm going to just cite work of Ilievsky and others in California, where they try to come up with a knowledge graph that harmonizes all these kind of other resources that exist by coming up with own, I think, 13 dimensions. So they try to map all those different sources that I've told you, ConceptNet and so forth, into sort of 13 relations or dimensions, as an attempt to harmonize all that knowledge into one coherent resource. But most importantly, they've looked at benchmarking the impact of common sense knowledge on downstream tasks. I think that's a very important task for all of us for the future, to develop a good understanding what common sense knowledge has the most impact on certain tasks. Okay? So they looked at a question answering task. There are many of those nowadays in AI, but they looked, most importantly, in a zero-shot setting. So the interesting part about common sense knowledge is that it helps to generalize beyond what you've seen so far in training or in your life so far. Okay? So zero-shot settings are very interesting to evaluate the impact of common sense knowledge. So what they did is they generated artificial questions from the resources they have. So, for example, from the relation school used for learning from ConceptNet, you could generate a question like, what is the school used for? Answer is learning. So you can generate millions and millions of questions. Train kind of these, modern kind of large language models like Roberta or the one you like on these kind of question answering tasks, and then apply them to in a zero-shot setting to a new data set with new questions that the system hasn't seen. And then they find that we see indeed that depending on the nature of the task, different types of common sense knowledge have a larger impact on the system. Okay, so here a CSQA is a common sense task, general one, multiple choice task, where they see, well, utility, for example, had the biggest impact, so knowing what objects are good for. While here in this task, which was called a social QA task, so more about social aspects, about how people feel and what the impact of things are on them, we see that, well, for example, temporal, so what the impact of events are, temporal matters a lot, and also other relations, like here the quality of objects. So we see quite of differences in the impact of particular dimensions of common sense knowledge on downstream tasks, and I think this is a very interesting avenue to investigate further. I conclude. As you see, there's been a lot of work in the last 20 years on scaling up common sense knowledge acquisition. Lots of interesting new resources ready to be used. We're getting more and more sophisticated and fine-grained in the way we model and represent that common sense knowledge. Okay? So we're not getting close to the detailed axiomatization that we see from the people that I had on one of the first slides, but we're getting increasingly sophisticated. One must say that there are quite limitations that I'm happy to talk about. So we have very fragmentary, only symbolic lexical knowledge at this point about things in the world. That's not everything we need, obviously. You know that very well. And the main thing is that common sense knowledge allows us, and it can be proven to allow us to generalize better beyond the data that we've seen or the experiences we have made. Okay? That's what this zero-shot question answering task shows. And something very important for me to say is always that, yes, there are people out there saying that we can learn everything from data. And there are big fights about can we learn everything from data or not, okay? And no one knows, really. Now, nobody has the answer to that question. But I want to say there might not be the need to learn everything from scratch, okay? If we have good knowledge resource or we have humans that we can leverage to elicit general knowledge that is not specific to a particular task. And there's a big space that here we need to explore. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for this interesting talk. There's one question. I guess we have time for exactly one question because
I'm sorry. I'm sorry for that.
Depending on
Ask
how
me anything you
hungry
like in the breaks.
So this is you.
Go back to your slide where you show, just one or two slides back. Right, there. So it's interesting that all does not dominate. Could
That,
you,
that all does not dominate.
the last row, I
Yeah.
assume is all of them together?
Yeah, that's interesting.
So there's some interference?
Well, yeah, thanks for the question. That's not my work here. That's the work by
wow.
Ilievsky and colleagues. But I agree that it's interesting that it's showing that I say that for some tasks, some things might even be detrimental. That's what it's showing here. Okay, I don't have the answer on why this is. I think in the paper they don't provide this answer. But I invite you to
Well, and
to read this paper
contrast,
further.
Any addition does give us pretty significant benefit over baseline.
Exactly. Exactly.
So
Thanks.
things that you might think are irrelevant seem to give a benefit. So who knows what's going on?
Yeah, okay. I rushed a bit through this, so thanks for making that point. That we see differences in terms of impact of each single type of common sense or each dimension, but what we do see is that the addition of any single dimension improves results upon the baseline that doesn't use any common sense knowledge. Okay? Which proves exactly that what I was rushing over at the end, that in a zero-shot setting, where we are asking a system to extend to solve something that it has never seen in that way before, the common sense knowledge is really helping in any single dimension. I think that's an interesting message.
So thank you. Yeah, it's time for lunch. Thank you.